How and why we fear others. 1. People will see me. 25. If needing or fearing people is as universal a problem as it seems, if needing or fearing people is as universal a problem as it seems, then we would expect Scripture to be filled with rich descriptions of it and in-depth teaching about it. And it is. The fear of man lays a snare, but whoever trusts in the Lord is safe. Proverbs 29:25. One of the Bible's dominant questions is, whom will you fear? Need be controlled by. Will you fear God or people? Scripture gives three basic reasons why we fear other people, and we will look at each of them in turn. We fear people because they can expose and humiliate us, ridicule and reject us, and attack, threaten, or oppress us. These three reasons have one thing in common. They see people as bigger, that is more powerful and significant than God, and out of the fear that creates in us, we give other people the power to tell us what to feel, think, and do. The fear that comes from shame. The first reason we fear other people is that they can expose or humiliate us. In other words, shame leaves us vulnerable to the fear of men. 26. That was apparent from the beginning. Immediately after Adam and Eve sinned, the eyes of both were opened, and they knew that they were naked. Genesis 3:7. The sin quickly descended into finger pointing and accusing, which is to say, that person is worse than me. This was the debut of the fear of men. Shame, consciousness, exposure, vulnerability, and desperate need of covering or protection under the gaze of the holy God and other people. Shame from sin. First came the look from the other person. It was as if for the first time the man and woman stared at each other in judgment. After that came that even more penetrating look from God. Both were so disturbing that Adam and Eve hid, and we are still hiding today. Adam and Eve had known they were naked before they sinned, but they had known they were naked before they sinned. But in their state of innocence, this had never provoked a look of judgment. This look was different. It could see a deeper nakedness, at least the one who was being observed. It felt more exposed. The men and women tried coverings, but fig leaves could not alleviate the deeper shame. What had once been a blessing, knowing and being known, was now a curse. What had once been a loving meeting of the eyes became impolite and intrusive. At the moment of Adam's sin, shame became a cornerstone of human experience. What do they think of me? What does God think of me? In a moment, humanity felt unacceptable. In a curious twist, it was the gaze of the other person that the men and women felt most. Adam and Eve covered themselves when they were seen by each other. God, of course, sees all things. Other people do not. And other people are not much different from ourselves. So it is surprising that we are usually more concerned about other people than God. But this is a key feature of our fear of men. Since sin entered the world, we see God less clearly and are less attentive to Him, but we are acutely, if not painfully, aware of other people's scrutiny. 27. Shame and being victimized or sinned against. In the course of human spiritual history, a variant of shame emerged. Original shame was a result of our sin, the result of our being unclean and naked both before the holy God and before others. Later shame was also the result of being sinned against. of being victimized or dishonored by others. This second, for example, when Dinah was blank by Shechem, she was defiled. Genesis 34:5. This does not mean that Dinah was responsible for what happened to her. The point is that even though she had not sinned, there was a sense in which her purity was marred, and it changed everything. I feel like I have a neon sign across my forehead that says, I have been blank by my uncle, said one woman. She could be a spokesperson for thousands of others. I am afraid to be with other people because I might contaminate them, said another victim. Other people can do things to us that make us unclean. If a man commits adultery with another man's wife, the innocent spouse is shamed or dishonored, literally made naked, by another's sin. See Leviticus 20:11, 17, 19 through 21. Unruly children bring shame and disgrace on their parents. Proverbs 19:26. In the Old Testament, the temple was defiled because unclean men entered it. Psalm 79. A similar thing happened when Israelites touched the carcass of an animal that had been declared unclean. Those who touched it, even accidentally, had to wash their clothes and were considered unclean until the evening. Leviticus 11:24. There are two ways that we can become naked or unacceptable. The first is a nakedness that is due to our sin. The second is nakedness that we experience because of the sin of other people. What gets confusing is that shame from victimization feels identical to the shame we feel from our own sin, even though the cause is very different. Victims feel embarrassed, humiliated, and disgraced because of others' sins against them. They feel unclean, 28, and naked, and unable to cover themselves. They feel as if they are under the all-knowing gaze of others, and they fear people. Both sin and shame share a common treatment. Rest, cleansing, and acceptable is found in the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. But keep in mind the difference between the two. Sin is something we have done. Victimization is done to us. Hiding and spying. When you feel exposed, one instinct is to cover your face. Children do that. Don't look at me, or if I can't see you, then you can't see me. Since our hands are no long-term solution, we can turn to something more durable. We live behind walls. This is where the fear of men makes its full entrance. The problem with the fear of men is not the shame of sin or victimization. The problem is that we use our own strategies to protect ourselves and improve our reputation. So we build walls. The walls are 10 feet thick, nobody can come in, and I can't get out. These desperate coverings isolate, but they also protect us from the gaze of other people. In practice, these walls can be built with thousands of different materials: money, fame, athletic accomplishments, jobs, and business. Nothing man-made, however, can truly cover shame. A curious feature of most of these walls is the way they allow us to see other people. The thick walls have small cracks or windows that allow us to see outside. We want to hide, but we also want to spy. On the one hand, spying may reveal the vulnerability of others so that we can believe that they are no different from us or even not as good as us. Disgrace one's company. On the other hand, it may reveal someone who is strong and can be our hero. With heroes, we feel less isolated because we can enter into a safe fantasy relationship. 29. Fantasy is a popular pastime behind these walls. For example, Paula was a successful single woman. She had a great job with lots of responsibility and plenty of affirmation from her CEO. She was active in her church and well liked, but in the evenings, she lived with her fantasy husband and fantasy children. One reason she developed her fantasy world was because it gave her what she wanted. Another reason was that it gave her relationships without the risk of being known. Fantasy has been part of my own world too, I confess. For example, I am relatively coordinated from the waist up, but my feet are useless. Too many years of swimming, I think. Coincidentally, my wife is coordinated all over, and she enjoys dancing. Do you know what happened the last time we came home from a party? My mind began to roam. I began to fantasize that I had been a great dancer. In my fantasy of the past evening, I walked casually out onto the dance floor, just a regular guy, and all of a sudden I was a Mensa, Fred Astaire, John Travolta, and Mick Jagger. People were amazed. My wife thought I was great. Funny and pitiful. My point is that this relatively harmless fantasy was filled with fear of men. It was a way to manage what other people might think of my klutziness. There is a paradox of self-esteem. I feel horrible about myself and worse than others, and I aspire to be impressive or better than others, at least in some small way. The reason I feel bad about myself is that I want a few minutes of greatness. I am a peasant who wants to be king. When we are in the grips of low self-worth or self-esteem, it's painful and it certainly doesn't feel like pride. But our hearts are busy while we hide and spy. Have you wondered why certain TV shows, magazines, and websites are so popular? Don't they offer us a brief opportunity to spy on others from behind our walls of shame? They let us see the disgrace of others, and that normalizes our own. Or they let us identify with our heroes so we can briefly feel better about ourselves. 30. It is as if the modern person is a peeping Tom while he is looking at someone through a keyhole. He is being watched by another voyeur who is being watched by another who is being watched by another. The midnight hour. In the early 1800s, Danish philosopher Søren Kierkegaard observed people whose lives consisted of hiding and spying. Rather than walls, they used masks. Do you not know that there comes a midnight hour when everyone has to throw off his mask? Do you believe that life will always let itself be mocked? Do you think you can slip away a little before midnight to avoid this? Or are you not terrified by it? I have seen men in real life who so long deceive others that at last their true nature could not reveal itself. I have seen men who played hide and seek so long that at last, in madness, they disgustingly obtruded upon others their secret thoughts, which hitherto they had proudly concealed. He is right. Every day is Halloween. Putting on our mask is a regular part of our morning rituals, just like brushing our teeth and eating breakfast. The masquerade, however, is anything but festive. Underneath the mask are people who are terrified that there will be an unveiling, and indeed the mask and other coverings will one day be removed in an eternal unveiling. But it is not so much the eyes of other people that are ought to fear. After all, other people are not different from ourselves. Kierkegaard points to a deeper fear, the eyes of God. If the gaze of men awakens fear in us, how much more so the gaze of God? 31. If we feel exposed by people, we feel we will feel devastated before God. To even think of such things is overwhelming. Our hearts tremble at the thought, and we do everything we can to avoid it. One way to avoid God's eyes is to live as if fear of other people is our deepest problem. They are big, not God. This, of course, is not the case. Fear of people is often a more conscious version of fear of God. That is, we are more conscious of our fear of others than our fear of God. Granted, fear of others is a real phenomenon. We really are afraid of the thoughts, opinions, and actions of other people, but under that we hide as best we can. The more desperate fear of God, for example, notice the biblical version of Kierkegaard masquerade. Turning to them, Jesus said, "Daughters of Jerusalem, do not weep for me, but weep for yourself and your children. For behold, the days are coming when they will say, Blessed are the barren and the wombs that never bore and the breasts that never nursed. Then they will begin to say to the mountains, Fall on us, and to the hills, cover us." Luke 23:28-30. When Christ returns, those who are naked would prefer being covered by the boulders of Jerusalem's mountains to being exposed before the holy gaze of God. God's answer and our response. Of course, God has an answer to this fear. The gospel is a story of God's covering his naked enemies, bringing them to the wedding feast, and then marrying them rather than crushing them. King David, who knew about his coming good news, said, "O Lord, you have searched me and known me." Psalm 139:1. God's gaze, a curse to those who are naked. 32. Was to him a blessing. His gaze protects those whose guilt he has atoned for and whose sins he has covered. But what if fear lingers even for those who have been covered with the righteousness of Jesus? The answer seems simple. Just remember what Jesus accomplished in his death, resurrection, and ascension. He has removed your shame. Other people no longer have the power to heap shame on you. Only your own sin leaves you unclean, and God forgives you when you confess your sin to him. This might be the only liberating teaching that a fearful person needs. However, my personal experience suggests that there are many times when a solution must consider of more than a reminder of gospel truth. I am not saying that the gospel of Jesus is not enough. What I mean is that we need to pay attention to the quiet waywardness of the human heart. We need not only to remember the gospel, but to examine ourselves in its light and then act on what we know. For example, how does the preeminence, Colossians 1:18, of Jesus affect our conversations? Are we confessing sins daily? Do we turn to God when life is overwhelming, or do we try to manage our world? The problem so far. Let's summarize where we are now. The first view the Bible gives us of the fear of men is tied to shame and our effort to cover ourselves. We try to protect ourselves and avoid the gaze of others, and for good reason. But don't miss the deeper problem. The problem appears to be the gaze of other people, but in reality, the problem is within us and between God and ourselves. Peer pressure misses it. The ultimate problem is not the gaze of others, but the gaze of God. We classify the problem as a fear of men only because it is most obvious when we are in the presence of others. For example, if the high school auditorium in the introduction had been empty, or the vice principal had told me that I had won an award over the phone, I would not have been embarrassed. 33. The presence of others leaves us feeling exposed. However, even though it feels as if other people are causing us to feel shame, in reality, we carry shame with us all the time. Other people simply trigger its appearance. It's no wonder that we can feel as though we are playing characters rather than living fully open lives. But there is a way forward. The answer to shame induced fear of men lies in our relationship with God. He cleanses us. We cannot cleanse ourselves. Both our sin and shame lose their power when we have been sanctified through the offering of the body of Jesus Christ once for all. Hebrews 10:10. Again, it's no wonder that we can feel as though we are playing characters rather than living fully open lives. But there is a way forward. The answer to shame-induced fear of men lies in our relationship with God. There is much more that could be said. For now, it is enough to find words of identifying what makes us susceptible to the fear of men. As you finish the chapter, consider your own tendencies to hide. Perhaps you can take hope in Scripture's familiarity with the experience of shame. God has good and important things to say to you. For further thought, 1. If you still have a hard time seeing the fear of other people in your life, consider any ways that your private life differs from your public one. Are there sins that you can easily confess to God but would find very difficult to share with another person? Are there things about yourself that you simply don't want people to know? These questions may reveal some of the roots of shame-driven fear of men in your life. 2. Consider some of the strategies you use to cover yourself, and remember that most people wear multiple layers.